Welcome, fellow wine lovers. This is the Wine Ghost podcast. I'm Máté Vas, certified sommelier and seeker of hidden stories behind the most mysterious drink in history. If you have any questions about the topics we mentioned during the shows, please look for the Wine Ghosts on Instagram, where you can send your questions and responses via direct messages or just leave a comment under the episode's post. You can also find easy ways to get in contact with our guests and follow their stories. But now, please grab a glass, get comfortable, and listen how today's ghosts get out of the bottle. After the most recent episode from the Somló Hill, I went more south on the Balaton Uplands to visit another great winemaker from the region, this time already on the St. George Hill. I got invited to the Szászi Winery, where I met with the young Endre Szászi, who is a second-generation winemaker in his 20s. A bottle of their flagship Olaszrizling and a magnificent view to the Szigliget castle has set the mood for our conversation in front of their cellar door on a beautiful sunny afternoon. The Szászi family has been organically cultivating wine on the hill for more than 2 decades now, and Endre explained its hardships and benefits in great detail. He also introduced us to the unique terroir and history of the region's winemaking, and why their kabócás parcel is the best of them all. He characterized the region's typical varieties like the Kéknyelű and the Rózsakő, their origins, as well as their tasting profile. After listening to this episode, you'll also know which stone to sit on with your loved one in the hope of having a marriage soon, and which unrepeatable Szászi wine has helped me to win the love of my life. I hope this talk will also make you want to visit this place once, and taste its organic wines made from indigenous varieties in the near future. I hope you enjoy this episode. So, Endre, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm mighty fine, thank you.
Thanks for the welcoming and thanks for the invitation. It's a very beautiful sunshine today. I'd just like to begin with a little introduction. Where are we actually? It's a little office, right? It's a little office building next to the restaurant.
Yeah, it's under the restaurant actually, and next to the actual cellar. So that way.
Oh, okay.
Are the barrels.
Oh, perfect. So close to the fire. And maybe start a little bit about the history of the winery.
All right. So we have started, and this is a pretty royal way. So my parents started, and I was playing along. When around 20 years back, my father has already been a winemaker as a hobby mostly, but that was his actual calling. And my mother, she just started studies as a lawyer, and we owned a little pet shop in Tapolca, and from that little pet shop, we basically scouted the area. My mother is from Tapolca, my father is from Szigliget, and between them is this hill, St. George Hill, and so it was a natural pick for them to move here, and they did. They managed to get some pretty nice low effort loans, and they put their sights into this place. Back then it was basically fully overgrown with inventive little trees and crickets, and here was actually an old Olaszrizling plantation, but that was really overgrown and damaged by the collective winemaking of the communist era. But it was a start. So there was a ruin here where now the wine shop is. There was a ruin there where the little cottage is, which can be rented. And there was nothing on the place where our house stands now. And this was just a little boop in the hill, this really big building we are right now. And it all started with that little wine shop. My father and his first colleague, they started to clean out the Olaszrizling and clean out the crickets around the would-be house, and started planting. And while they planted, the builders built our house, and yeah, it was a really really effortful time for the whole family.
It was 99, right?
Yeah,
Or
around
90?
around 99. Yeah, I kind of remember it, but you know, I was around like really small back then, like 5, 4, and yeah, I remember planting the grapes. I actually not helped, but I was there. They did it by hand, so there was this handmade hand driller that give us the big holes for the main structural elements, and actually the big structural elements were carved and burned by my father and his colleague as well. Little lines of cloth showed the way where the line should probably be, and yeah, and we did the first not proper construction, but reconstruction was the reconstruction of the wine shop. And we did that, and my father was the winemaker, wine seller, and wine transporter rolled into one. And this one colleague of my father was like the everything else that needed to be done. And it was a start, a really tough start. My mother was like, while she helped with the paperwork of the winery, and she was the one who actually found these low effort loans. She just by the side did her whole law degree and stuff. And yeah, and she was the one who was who had the idea to start off as a organic winery as well.
And what do you know about the motivations behind starting an organic winery? Because it was not so fashionable at that
back
time,
then
right?
it was just crazy because nobody, not nobody did not. We were not the first by any means. Even in this hill, there was an organic winemaker, and that was a really big help because we could ask for help and such. But yeah, it was not a big hip thing back then, organic winemaking. But my mother, she already had a doctorate, PhD from natural protection of valleys and such. I don't know the proper English term for it, but it's basically a natural protecting, wildlife preserving PhD. And so she had pretty clear ideas about the effects of chemicals used in agriculture. And she didn't want those chemicals anywhere near her 21 golden retrievers and 2 children, because at that time at that time we had a canal of golden retrievers, and we were by the side by the lawmaking and the wine. We had a bunch of golden retrievers, and they were Szászi at the top, so they still our house is full of the golden cups they won in different competitions. And she put it up, and my father quickly made the whole thing his own. Well, not the idea, but he became a really effective organic winemaker, because with organic winemaking, yeah, it's you're making your own job difficult if you only see it as from a winemaker engineer perspective. It's less effective protection than what proper chemicals can provide. And so this decision from my mother's part was like a big thing, and basically I don't think we would be at this stage if she would not have said it. But what she did at the time was making my father's life just a little more difficult, because you had to be like really on the top of the whole thing if you, and it's still you have to be, because we still have some years when we lose some distant plantations that wasn't checked like rigorously, because of organic protection methods are really work related. So like we have to work heavily and have 100% attention to the grape to properly protect it with these methods.
Because actually the two most important chemicals what you can use is copper and sulfur, right?
That's right, yes. And that's just a membrane, a physical protection on the grape. It can be washed away by rain, and actually it doesn't do anything about illnesses already inside of the grape. So while you can do certain chemicals, they are there, and this is the biggest problem with them, that they penetrate the basically the whole organic structure of the grape. They go into the flow of the water inside the grape, and they get everywhere. And this way, killing all the illnesses that one can think of. But they already, once they're inside, they don't go anywhere. And these kind of chemicals, whilst they are not immediately any threat to human physiology, they're the kind of chemicals that our liver can't properly digest, and so they remain. So every glass of wine, every fruit eaten which has like protecting chemicals inside of them is just a micro amount more poison you drink, and it's really not a big threat by any means. So I don't want to do this whole do bio or die thing. But yeah, they don't do you any good, that's for sure. So and what the worst thing is when you get them directly, so not already inside of the grape, but like if we would just play outside and we would be sprayed with this stuff, it would do us no good. Let's just
like your mother knew already.
Yeah, like my mother knew that. So we were like, I think the golden retrievers, like this whole inner place is surrounded by a little fence, and that whole inner place is like 1.5 hectares, I guess. It was like dominated by all these golden retrievers. They were like scavenging everywhere, and so it was impossible to protect them from the chemicals that
And are you also conscious about using sulfur with the wines?
Yes, but not at the point when we would risk the wine to not be properly preserved. So we use the least amount we possibly can and have still stable wines, sometimes even going as far as to lose a few hundred bottles to emerging fermentation when we are a little bit too optimistic about the stability of the wine. But yeah, we don't like when the wine is so. Szászi wines, you have to drink a lot of them to have a hangover, and that hangover will not be because of sulfur. That will be because of chronic dehydration. So,
if you already mentioned the terroir and the landscape that we saw, how many hectares do you have now?
All of them together is around 18 hectares, and like one big third of them is here in St. George Hill in one continuous row going in the direction of Balaton. Well, and then we have a big plantation in Szigliget as well, 2 different types of Olaszrizling, and we have some scattered around in Balaton region, and some even getting out of Balaton that way, in the way of Keszthely, and those are like these smaller things like Cserszegi fűszeres, stuff like that, and those are the only wines that are not in like this basalt and prone forest soil kind of deal, but they actually the better for it, because we planted those wines purposefully in the places where they can bring out the most of themselves.
Okay, and you mentioned also Szigliget. It's what is maybe the key difference between these? What are the key differences between these plantings?
The closeness of Balaton is the main
what
deal.
effects does it have?
It has a multiple effects. One of the better one of those are basically a climate stabilizer effect. The closeness of a big water surface is always good for winemaking, not just because of the reflection from the water, that's a good thing as well, it's called a double sunshine effect, but it's actually, as like big frost would came, the lake actually sucks it in, with lack of a better word. As the lake freezes over, which is now really rarely, it just sucks in all the cold, and this way protects the lower plantations from freezing damage. and that's really good. But also, and especially now, there are a few bad things about the closeness of Lake Balaton. The most obvious one is the much higher percentage of water that can be in the air at any time. Humidity, yeah. It's a really bad deal for a bio winemaker. It would not be a deal breaker for like standard conventional chemicals, but for us, we need a completely dry, or at least like 95% a dry surface to bring this little sulfuric stuff on, because if we spray it on anything that has little water molecules in it, they will just crystallize around those molecules and not make a proper membrane. And that's no good news to us. It's basically completely useless if you do it that way, because the only thing this stuff does is create this little shield. And so we have this amazing plantation of the it's called the cicada in English. In Hungarian it's kaboca. Cicada plantation. It was the first Sabinitarian little basically heat trap on the third hill. So Szigligeti has 3 hills: the Castle Hill, the Skirt of the Queen, and the Saint Antal Hill. And on Saint Antal's Hill there is this valley, the Cicada Valley, as the locals call it, because there is like this little population of cicadas that used to only live there and give the valley its name. And these are like not the bad German kind of cicadas that has all these nasty viruses in their bellies. These are completely harmless local population of Manna cicada. They were brought in by the parks of Szigligeti when they planted Mediterranean trees. With the trees came a few like seashore cicadas, and they survived in this valley for insanely long time. But that valley is like really protected. It has wonderful natural properties, not the least which is this surrounding property that is by trees, and the hill itself, it just grows around it. And so this push, the heat push that basalt stones can do, it's exponentially more well definable there, and so it's like a few Celsius more, than the temperature is always a few Celsius higher there than everywhere else, and it's awesome for winemaking, but sometimes when there is a bit more rainy season than perfect, basically rains can stuck there. This humidity, this misty stuff, it can stuck in this heat trap and basically just vaporize and not blown off by the wind, not dried out by direct sunshine. It just vaporizes by this heat, and that's the perfect environment for mushroom illnesses. Botrytis and all types of mushroom love this humid, heaty stuff, and by the time we can bring our weaponry to bear, bring our biomethods to bear, the damage is already done. So it's wet, and while it's wet, the mushroom attacks. And so that's the reason why we only have 2 vintages of this type of Olaszrizling. 2006, it was the first one. It basically brought our winery a really big fame boom. It was like a free marketing boost. And the second one was in 2015, and now actually there is a next one in the making, the 18th. And it's because I think there has been a big cut of forest just the side of this little valley, and now there is a minimal amount of wind there. So maybe in the next years we will have more luck with that plantation. But the best Olaszrizling we make from that plantation.
Can you please first tell about the typical soil types of the region and the composition?
The main soil type, and especially on the hills, is this brown forest soil mixed in with basalt. So it's basically all of these hills that are here in the Balaton wine region. These are the cores of much bigger hills that once were, and those hills were created like really prehistorically, like back in the days when we were like this place was bottom of a sea, and by this sea and by the millions of years of erosion by rainwater and ice, the shells around these basalt cores have been eroded away, and now only the basalt remains. And upon this basalt are this extremely rich and fertile soil, this brown forest soil that you can just see wherever you gaze upon an open field around here. And this is basically because it was like completely forested over before the Romans came. There was a few villages here and there, but like, you know, really nothing substantial. And then like the first opening of these fields were around the time where Roman latifundiums were created. There was one here in St. George Hill as well, where now the Hungarian Winery stands. That was, I would guess that was the place where the Roman latifundium once stood, and that road there, which is part of the Blue Mountain Trip Road, is actually a Roman road. So it connects all of the hills of Balaton, because I guess every hill had a latifundium, and somewhere in Szigliget there should have been a dock, because there are like remains of a fortress in the middle hill that are much older than the proper fortress on the fortress hill. And so that was the first time viticulture was ever properly made here. The secret of the hills basically is this basalt stone. Now there is a lot of theories why basalt stones are good. What's completely sure and proven is that they provide a really good heat boost at the night. But then again, there is this aftertaste in every wine that was made on a volcanic hill. Some call it whetstones, like some call it mineralistic, but the thing is, it's a salty kind of taste, and the chemistry behind it is not yet not yet properly proven and understood. There's a lot of theories, like there was a theory about like little microatoms of the stone actually managing it to somehow get into the wine. It was now, by my knowledge, it was disproven. There is now the most famous one is that actually grape doesn't want to live in soil with rocks, and so the extra suffering and extra efforts of the grape that makes this salty aftertaste. I don't think so. So I think it's silly to assume this at the least. But I have read it in like proper agricultural books, so I think there is some other reason. But in the meanwhile, I can colorize this thing with all with my magic stuff that I like to babble on about on a wine tasting. I think that there is some scientifically understandable way of describing how the salty aftertaste makes it into the wine. I'm not going to hold my breath until they figure it out, but it's a good thing.
And under the basalt rock, which is really from the Pannonian Sea, state is actually clay and sandy soil, right?
Yeah, so there is not under that. So basalt, everything we stand on right now is basalt. So basalt came from under. This sandy stuff from the Pannonian Sea is on the basalt, and so there are chunks of land here on St. George Hill, Balaton, basically every hill in the Balaton wine region that are not really good for typical agriculture because they are sand. They are not overgrown construction sites or anything, but they are this Pannonian sand, and sometimes this always this sand has in it these sand rocks that are like unlike basalt, which fragments into these really small holdable things. Sand rocks are like they can, when they fragment into smaller pieces, those smaller pieces really quickly fragment away. So the only properly distinguishable form of these sand rocks are like really big chunks of rocks. They look amazing. We found a lot of them from the St. George Hill. If you look at the direction of Balaton Hill, there is a chunk in the St. George Hill where there are these really big rocks of sand soil. Actually, there was a bunch of foxes living under one at one time.
And in terms of elevation, how high are we now?
Oh, just a few hundred meters. If we would use proper national terms for hill, neither of the Balatonian hills would be proper hills. They look imposing, but they're basically just a shell of a hill.
Maybe in terms of exposure, what are the best ones that you look for? South,
towards Balaton, but south is always good. The sun comes up at the Castay Hills. It never goes so far north that northern vines would profit from it. So like northern exposure vines would profit from it. So it's always around the southern side of the hills. So if you want the most sunshine hours, you plant on the southern side. That's one thing. The other is the closeness of Balaton for the Balaton hugging hills. And there are a lot of wind channels that actually break on the back of, for example, St. George Hill. We break a lot of storms. There are storms that are stopped by the hill, at least for a while, but like a lot of ice damage can be like plucked out this way. So it basically just crashes into the hill or just tries to roll around it, and it starts to ice on top of the hill and the northern side instead of us. Of course, sometimes even we get something when it's coming from that direction, coming from west, but it's much more rare than the northern storms. And the other, so basically there is a wind channel from west, there is a wind channel from north, there is a wind channel from the east, and they're getting, imagine them as rivers that are like really shallow rivers that are broken by this rocky bed of the river. So we are one of these rocks, and so the wind just scatters around, for example at this plantation which is right in front of the winery, and that wind is really useful for us. I mentioned we like dry wine when we want to use our bio protectional methods, and no way to make a dry wine than a natural hair dryer that just dries you out after a storm. And luckily, after a storm, it's almost always windy.
And in the summer, because now if I look to the southwest, right, I see a really big swamp actually after a big rain. It's always like that, or it's in the summer? How much rain can you count on?
Yeah, around the winter, it's like that. In the old days, it used to freeze over those water surfaces you see now, and we would used to go play hockey on them. But nowadays that we are basically a Mediterranean country now, all of these places they're just becoming more like the original one. So there was this, even in human history, there was a time like this. So Sziget used to be called Sziget-liget, which is for the English speaker audience. It basically means park island or an island with lovely trees. And so it's a natural occurrence that it's that watery, but that's one of the main reasons why we don't plant vine down the hills and in the valleys.
And if you mentioned humidity, do you have also botrytized vines? Or
yeah, we have botrytized, we have I don't know what lace harmot is called in English, but then that awful thing, and there are just a bunch of like gray rotting and stuff like that. We also had at one time, like proper botrytis, like noble botrytis that we could use to make also tasting stuff. But the thing is, we are not glad when we have botrytis, because it comes with a cocktail of other, like grey rotting. And our worst year yet was 2014, and my father called it the noise year, and it was basically a really, really rainy year. So it rained all summer, most of the autumn, and in the spring it was just basically like living in a waterfall.
So it's not what you aim for, really, or it's not difficult to the area?
No. Botrytis was helpful then, but only because we could use it to cover the surface of the grapes and cut down everything else. And it was a horrible price to pay, but elsewise we would not had any wine in 2014. And so we had a really weird year in 2014, in a good way. A lot of people still searching for that kind of taste. We had dry, botrytis infused Balachonian wines, which is a really interesting thing if you see it as a wine connoisseur. But if you're a winemaker, you don't want a year like that in your life.
Now maybe let's talk about the wines.
All right.
If you are in front of us, a beautiful white wine.
Yes, this is our most classic white wine. It's our mainstay, Olaszrizling. We have lots of Olaszrizling. So before we reach this level that we taste right now, one should taste the basic Olaszrizling we have, which is still a really good Olaszrizling, but it's not from just one plantation, it's a multitude of plantations altogether. And then we have the lower quality Szigligeti Olaszrizling, which is lower quality compared to the Kabóczás, Cicada, super awesome kind of deal. But there are like two different plantations. There, one of them are on the skirt of the hill, so like really low, only in a cru position, and the Kabóczás is in a Grand Cru. And then we reach this one. This is the best Olaszrizling we have that still remains its mainstay qualities as a proper Olaszrizling. So this is a classical Balachonian style Olaszrizling, as it should be by the book, and we really like it. I actually like to give little characters for our plantations. And so this Olaszrizling's character is a hobbit or an English gentleman in the countryside. It always answers just like we would want him to. So like there is no surprises with this one. And that's a really weird thing in bio cultivation, because we don't use any like controlling yeast while fermenting.
So you only use native yeast?
No, it's native spontaneous fermentation. Most of the time it works, but sometimes there are like really big surprises. And the only wine that has stayed all the same except one vintage was this Olaszrizling. And that one vintage was 2014, but even a hobbit can once go to a dragon hunt, you know, like it's allowed. And
do you always ferment in stainless steel, or do you use...
Always. With spontaneous fermentation, it's important to have control over the temperature of the fermentation and not have any other additional effects like oxidation, which the wooden fermentation would give. And
do you enforce, for example, malolactic? If it happens, it happens, or
if it happens, it happens. We don't enforce stuff like that on the wine.
And is it typical in this area, or how would you, because you said it's a typical Balachonian?
Yeah, so like not the method it was made by. There are multitudes of organic and biodynamic wineries around Balaton, thank God, but not necessary to be organic or spontaneous fermentation to make a good Balachonian Olaszrizling. This is a really good Balachonian Olaszrizling, but it could have been made by other methods. A few tastes would be different, but those tastes are not the reason why I said this is a classical Balachonian Olaszrizling. Those tastes are why people would recognize it as a Szászi, or at least from some bio winery. They're actually the cracks in the armor of the perfect Botocinian Olaszrizling, but those cracks are the one that gives it character.
And what is this character, if I may ask?
Oh, of course.
How would you characterize?
So this has all the mainstays of an Olaszrizling. So like there's special kind of nut that an Olaszrizling has. Then the salty aftertaste, which is in some of these even volcanic vines, fruitiness can overcome acidity, and with the acidity it overcomes the salty aftertaste. But with this one there is a really good balance between fruitiness and the acids. And with the acids, when you can taste acids, you can taste the acidy aromas, and with the acidy aromas, you can taste this salty aftertaste. So that's why I personally hold it in high regard. Like these styles of Olaszrizlings, it's not just our own Olaszrizling. There are a couple others that have the same basic style with their own little cracks and flares and different characters. But you asked about the character. So this Szászi taste, as I hear it, is really hard to define, because every cellar that uses spontaneous fermentation has its own little extra in every wine. It's really hard to properly put to words, and I did reset. It's just that a few extra aromas that gives a kind of not uniform but familiar feel to different types of wine that came from one organic cellar.
And do you think it's because of the yeast or the microbes that lives in the cellar, or?
There are these two schools of thought, so I'm not quite sure which one, if they have actually managed to overcome each other. I think it's a mix of the two, but if I would have to put my money on one of them, I think yeast has more to do with how a wine turns out than the little microorganisms that might live in a cellar, and especially because we are sterile, and every organic and bioorganics even more so have to be really careful about their wineries' sterility. When you use these small amounts of sulfur to conserve your wine, and it does not have any fancy labor-made yeast to make it foolproof, then you have to be really careful not to give any other kind of deal into the mix when it ferments because if you do, then horrible things can happen. Thankfully, with my father's Spartan guidance, this is not a deal we ever experienced, but I have seen vines go to shit in school experiments and in young friends' cellars just because of the lack of sterility. So that's why I think yeast has much more to do with a specific winery's feel, and especially because specific wineries usually bring fruit from the same kind of environments.
So let's taste it, maybe, if you have it already. Cheers.
Cheers. It's still very young. I like it when it can age.
It's a 2018, yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah. 2018, Olaszrizling from St. George Hill. So our mainstay English gentleman kind of Olaszrizling, and it's still really freshly bottled, and it has to stay at least 1 year in the or just a little bit in the bottle to like.
So it was spontaneous fermentation in stainless steel. Yeah. And how many months did it spend in the barrel then?
Below 30 days. We have really old barrels, and they oxidate much quicker than young barrels, give much less of a wooden feel. But with all these like relatively good things or like properties, there is one bad thing about old barrels. They are unexpectable. You have to check your wine day to day to see how it changed in an old barrel, because the oxidation method that basically what barrels are about is not as even in an old barrel as it is on a new barrel. That's one thing. The other thing is that we don't want wooden tastes in wines. Maybe a few that are like really heavy, for example, Cabotage. It can accommodate with it myriad of other tastes, yet another thing from the wood. But classic Olaszrizling, like this one, can be overwhelmed
by a wooden taste.
Wooden taste.
Because actually, if I smell the wine, it's not the fruit flavors are the first that comes to my mind, more like the flower ones, and also maybe like this honeysuckle, honey, really sweet flowers, sweet white flowers. But I would say it's not fruit driven.
Yeah, that's part of the terroir. So this wild flower thing is present in Saint George Hill and Szigliget. In Balaton less so. Maybe even some of the Chobansian style of wines. It must be something about the biome there that gives this specific aroma, but it's just the beginning of the wine is where it's so distinguishable and having a thing. And while the wine ages, it can change into a much more classic Olaszrizling feel. But yeah, I told you it's a classic Balatonian style of Olaszrizling.
Like really a lot of almost tertiary aroma, even though it's a very young wine.
Yeah.
So I would say it's really, I would guess it's an older wine and maybe with more oxidation, but it still has its freshness and the acidity. So it's, even though it's 2018, it's quite fresh, but it's almost kind of old. So
yeah,
it's a beautiful balance.
It's what it does best. So this balanced in all meanings of the word. So like not going in any direction too much, which can be a good thing for a wine to just present one style. And but this Olaszrizling, it remains this perfectly calm English gentleman kind of deal, you know, like.
And can you so maybe give a reason why Olaszrizling, because it's really widely planted here in the region, but it's not all the native Hungarian variety as I know, right? Like you can find it also in Austria as a Weißriesling, for example.
Weißriesling and Olaszrizling are the same thing genetically, but they are quite different in the minds of the people. And even Olaszrizling and Olaszrizling can be at odds with each other inside of Hungary. So while it's true that Olaszrizling is not native to Hungary by any means, and we actually know its origins and story and such, it became native. It is our a little darling wine, you know, like everybody in Hungary. A person who have never in his life tasted wine, but somebody talked with him about it, and he's an Hungarian. He heard about Olaszrizling. So that's why I would not say that Olaszrizling is a big surprise at any region of Hungary, because it is the most well planted of all varieties. It's resistant to a certain degree. Almost in every wine region there is a wine institution, and most of those wine institutions have been making specific clones of Olaszrizling, and they have been made into a Hungarian thing. We have worked with this wine for centuries, and so that's why I don't think it's a foreign wine anymore. And especially like this lovely name Olaszrizling, which like literally means Italian Riesling. It has nothing to do with Italians, nor the Rieslings, by the way. So like the proper outside Hungary Rieslings. It's one of the charms that this wine has. But from a from a winemaker's kind of point of view, it is a really natural wine that is really good at representing the terroir it has been planted on. That's why I said that sometimes Hungarian Olaszrizlings are at odds with each other. In Balaton, Olaszrizlings can be a medium quality wine, but there can be so much more than that. And they're really good at like representing the place they have been planted on, and that's why if somebody would want to make a medium quality Olaszrizling, they can easily do so. They plant it somewhere where they wouldn't plant anything else, and that's where Weißrieslings come in. A lot of Weißriesling, as far as I know, I'm not from there, and I have never worked there. So just as far as I know, they're like they treat it as a second-grade second-rate quality wine under like the proper Rieslings, and I can easily understand why that's the case. But it is a waste of the potential of this style of this wine. And in Balaton, I think not just us, a lot of other winemakers show just how wrong those people are who think Olaszrizling is something to be on the middle to bottom on a wine shelf, because they can be quite extraordinary. And
agreed. Can you maybe talk about other varieties which are maybe native to the area? Maybe something like Rózsakő or Zeus or Cserszegi Fűszeres, what you also mentioned at the other side.
Yeah, I would gladly do so, but Zeus and Cserszegi Fűszeres, those are not natives to Balaton wine region, whilst Rulston or Rózsakő and Kéknyelű, they are like super native. So like they are like the myth of the region, especially Kéknyelű, because with Kéknyelű we are at an impasse. We don't really rightly know as of yet what the origins of Kéknyelű is, but it has been planted here since since immemorial, time immemorial.
How would you maybe compare it to the Olaszrizling? What is the typical taste of a Kéknyelű?
The first difference would be the smell. A Kéknyelű has a really withdrawn, withdrawn I think is the right word. It is a small, hard to detect aromatic mark. Immediately takes you over with its white flowers. A Kéknyelű, especially if you have tasted this before Kéknyelű, you wouldn't feel anything in the smell. Maybe some basic Balatonian aromas if you really try to sense something.
Actually, as I remember of Kéknyelű, the smell what I feel is the mineral. This is for me the typical mineral wine. It's because you can feel the saltiness, and I would also maybe put it to Ria Spices, to an Albarino, where you can almost feel the salinity, but from the sea. I could also feel the minerality or the saltiness from the soil, and it's like a flower which hasn't opened yet, and it needs a little bit of time. I don't know if you know it probably better, but that's always my impression.
Yeah, it's a really good impression, and yeah, that's what actually happens when you smell Kéknyelű. But if you are on a tasting, a really good giveaway of a Kéknyelű, the pale color and really withdrawn, like barely smellable, this mineralistic Balatonian style aromas. And then when you taste it, that's where all hell break loose in a good way. So it is a really acid-based wine. There are two schools of Kéknyelű. Fresh Kéknyelűs are like all around these acids and this mineralistic way of life. So it's basically you can barely taste anything else but the good spine of the acid and this salty stuff that brings it on. Maybe if you drink a full glass, then you will, at the end of it, you will feel different tastes, and those are just because you have your tongue already have a different standard with acids at the end of it. Yeah. But there are the other school of Kéknyelű making, is like the really aged old Kéknyelű, which has a lot of wood in them. Sometimes the results are extraordinary, sometimes not as much. When it's good, it loses some of its characters, it gains some smell aromas. Because of the aging, of course, it loses its really sharp acids, but becomes a bit different styled wine that has this dance between the oak and the acids dance. This is a really hard to find balance. Now the other stuff when oaks just takes over the whole Kéknyelű, and that's really waste of good Kéknyelű.
What you mentioned, Cserszegi Fűszeres.
Yeah, Cserszegi Fűszeres, it's not like local to us, it's Hungarian type of wine, but it was not made by the Balatonian Wine Institution, nor passed down from generations as Kéknyelű has been. Czerski Fűszeres is just Hungary's new little darling. It's new rising star in the Hungarian winemaking horizon. It's a easy to love, easy to make type of wine that would not do so well on basalt soil. I would even say that it as a waste of basalt soil to plant Czerski Fűszeres there, because the marks that makes Czerski Fűszeres good are would just get into the way of you tasting the marks that makes good volcanic wines good.
Do you mean because it's more fruit driven and maybe?
Yeah, it's extremely fruit driven. This whole smell charade that gives this Czerski Fűszeres aroma, it's named basically like the whole name. Like it was named like the spicy of Czerski for a reason. Even when we make it, and with under our hands, there has been a lot of deviations from static normal wine styles. Czerski Fűszeres becomes only a good Czerski Fűszeres. It has a glass ceiling. And this is the best quality of the wine, but at the same time, it's the worst quality of the wine as well. So it is easy to enjoy, and because if it's easy to enjoy, it has a glass ceiling of what you can achieve with it.
About Rózsakő, what you mentioned.
Yeah, Rózsakő is an entirely different deal. So there is like Kéknyelű. We have already talked about Kéknyelű. So Kéknyelű was here time immemorial, and Kéknyelű has a really specific need that has to be satisfied. So Kéknyelű is like a queen of Balaton, and it needs some gentlemen in her court to fertilize her, because Kéknyelű has no male fertilizing ants. Okay, if you just plant Kéknyelű, you will be surprised that you have no grape even after years have passed. That's because the Kéknyelű cannot actually bring grape on its own. It has a need for some gentleman to be planted along every second or third line of grape, and the gentleman traditionally was the Budai Zöld, which translates to green of Buda. But back then it was a second grade grape, or even third, and was considered a waste. So like even Kéknyelű even had this like little nickname, that the Lord's wine, or the rich people's wine, because only rich people could afford themselves to plant a grape that in every second or third line only makes waste grape. And yeah, that didn't sit too well with the communist winemakers. So like just the name is not a really good thing. But then again, Kéknyelű is like really needy, needs a lot of attention, easy to fall ill, doesn't bring that much of a yield. And because of these things, there was this quiet genocide of Kéknyelű in the communist era. Kéknyelű was made from Olaszrizling and Pinot Gris, and the real Kéknyelű plantations were slowly replanted quietly. Thankfully, they could not finish their ungodly work. At the time of the Gulag communism, times have changed, and Balaton Wine Institution started to experiment with Kéknyelű. The end result of those experiments have been the Rózsakő. She's the daughter of Kéknyelű, and such the princess of Balaton. She was already born to be a Balaton specific wine. Like the romantic thing about it is that the genetic material of Rózsakő was there in every Kéknyelű berry that has ever been produced by Green of Buda fertilizing methods, because there's already the potential of Rózsakő was there. Of course, a lot of other things are needed to make a fully fledged vine type than just plant the seed of a mixed genetic thing. But like the embryo, the little baby was already there inside of Kéknyelű, and it became Rózsakő around like 50 years back. And now it's a really good thing that we have Rózsakő, because it solves the big problem with the Kéknyelű Budai Zöld plantations, because you can plant Kéknyelű alongside with Rózsakő, and Rózsakő will fertilize Kéknyelű, and so you have a beautifully good grape in both of the lines. No longer you have a waste wine, even though that Budai at this day and ages, I would not consider it a waste wine. It can be, a lot of good things can be done with it. Rózsakő is sometimes it's less complex, the Kéknyelű, but more easy to love. A lot of people who say that Kéknyelű is too acidic, too hardcore for them, will find respite on the younger, more tender care of Rózsakő. But both of the wines are really good. And just the end note for Rózsakő, it's actually like this. It means roost stone. It is actually a tie-in into the urban legends of the Balaton wine region. We have an actual roost stone, so like it's not just the grape's name. There is a big basaltic stone that you can sit on, and its face has been carved into the shape of a wild rose. And the legend says that he who gets up there with his pair to see as the sun goes down to Lake Balaton, he will marry a year after. And yeah, it's a really good, as I was saying, a dangerous stone, so careful with that. But yeah, there are like a bunch of reinterpretations of the legends that go up there as the sun goes down to Lake Balaton, drink a bottle of roost stone, and magic will happen after, and stuff like that. But still,
we will spread the word. And
yes, it's a wonderful little stone.
And also, how, because you have a lot of grape varieties, as I was already in the Vinothek, and how would you maybe cluster them? Because you have volcanos, which we haven't talked about yet, but we also have Rózsakő and Zeus and Zenith. What are the more aromatic varieties, and what are the more maybe complex white wines? How would you cluster them?
Yeah, so we have a few reductive wines, and that would be our basic starter wine line. Those are Muscato Tonel dry, the sparkling wine we have, we call it the Gyöngyös, which is a mix of Pinot Gris and Muscato Tonel. Pinot Gris on its own, made reductively with an early harvest, as the Italians do it. Yet again, a starter wine. Zenith, we are moving in the direction of more complex wines with Zenith, but it's still a starter wine and a reductive wine. And then we are moving on to the easier, but right now those are not starter wines anymore kind of deals. We have reached the bottom of the Olaszrizling line. This is the Balatonian style Olaszrizling. Easy to understand, easy to love. Kéknyelű and Rózsakő, and sometimes they can be the best thing you can taste. But they are, because of their finely balanced acid-based taste, they need to be here for aged wines. Tastes and aromas will mess up their like little crystal palates. And so after that Olaszrizling comes the duo of Kéknyelű and Roosstone. There are multiple types of aged Olaszrizling there.
Volcanos is also a clone, right?
No, Volcanos is a variety. Yet again, not a Balatonian specific, but it's really good at our region. It's a really good pair because it was made, as the name suggests, for like this volcanic wines. It's if you want to taste a heavier wine than Kéknyelű, but still you want this whetstones deal, Volcanos is the wine for you.
So it has more body maybe than
it much more body, but less elegance, and the acids are not so sharp and
why is it then? Like the berries are different, or it reacts differently to the winemaking?
We make it differently. That's one thing, and we don't know what Kéknyelű was made from, but the parents must have been some really hardcore acid stuffs. Now Volcanos made to be this whetstones deal with less acids and more body. Now Kéknyelű is a whetstones deal with good body, but the emphasis is on the acid.
Nice. And what you mentioned, Zeus, for example, is not I haven't seen Zeus anywhere else in the world actually, but you said it's not a...
It's in Tokai as well. Okay. It's a Hungarian variety. There has been this Z Project Z.
Okay.
And instead of a start of a category B horror film, it was a start of a really big goulash communism wine renewal. Even the like really bad communist government realized that Hungary cannot be the country of steel and industry, because we just don't have the abilities for that. But we can be a breadbasket. And then they realized that with their unfortunate work, they have destroyed a lot of Hungary-specific varieties, not just in grape, but fruit, yield, all kinds of agriculture was graded down and destroyed, and and really unprofessionally run. By the end of this work, a lot of Hungarian varieties were lost, and so wine institutes like Balaton Wine Institute were tasked with a lot of money and resources to make new types of Hungarian wine. And so they did. I don't know why they've decided, but all of those new wines had a Z at the start of its name. So Zenit, Zengő, Zeta, Zeus, all of these Z-named wines are actually brothers and sisters of the same group of people, and that is not just Balaton, but here's one of the heads of this project. But there was like multitudes of other little wine institutes part of this experiment. Stuff was made for Hungary, and so nobody else used it.
But maybe they're made for the Tokaj terroir, right?
They were not made for a terroir. They were made for certain purposes. And Zeus's purpose was to bring a lot of fruit, sweetness, not fruit, and be really tough, fast-growing, and they reached
right?
all that. Yeah, like resistant to illnesses. We planted it. It was a rainy year, so it was probably good for the like growth of the wine. In 2 years, the first harvest happened, like just one fruit per little twig of grape, but still extraordinary. Normally it would take 3 or 4 years, mainly 4 years, to have a first proper harvest. And Zeus surprised us with this first harvest, and that was our first dry Zeus. We could make 2 other dry Zeuses, and at the end it became, when it toughened up a little bit and became more adult, the actual like grape, Zeus itself has become so sweetness bringing that even if we wanted to, we could not make a dry wine out of it. The wine is only good for a semi-sweet or probably even sweet, and so we leave it to be a dessert wine or make cuvées out of it to be semi-sweet stuff.
Just on a personal note, the first wine what my girlfriend got from me was actually a dry Zeus.
Oh,
so your wine actually maybe made her fall in love with me. So I will always have a
really
personal
rare wine
attachment to the dry Zeus. So I will always be grateful, and on this note,
Yes.
I thank you very much for your work, and thank you very much for.
It's always really nice to hear stories like this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really nice to hear stories like this, and you will be glad to know that was a really special wine that brought you together, because we cannot make it anymore.
Where could listeners and customers could find you? Maybe on the internet, or where could?
We have a web shop. And inside Hungary, we have a deal with a transporter. It brings into all nooks and crannies into Hungary in a few days. And the even more easy way is just to come here. We have 2 winotheks, one here in St. George Hill, and the other is in Szigliget.
Under the castle, actually.
Yeah, under the castle. It's actually called the Castle Wine Shop by everybody. And the only thing you cannot buy there is the wine we were talking about first in this little interview, because my father wants it so that Olaszrizling from St. George Hill could only be bought from St. George Hill.
Okay, so thank you very much, and I hope more and more people will come to your beautiful winery, and also to Winothek, and also have a restaurant.
Yeah,
right?
thank you. Yeah, so the restaurant is open all summer, and I recommend everybody to watch our Facebook, or else our Instagram, or we have a email line as well. if somebody wants to get information that way.
Beautiful. I will put all the links in the description. And
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much again. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, I hope you found this episode interesting and made you want to visit the region at least once in the near future and taste some Szászi wines while enjoying the magnificent landscape. If you follow the channel, you can easily become an expert of the St. Churchill wines because the next 2 episodes will also feature the wines of this marvelous hill. At the end of this month, you can hear about the philosophy behind the Gilvesi wines from the founder Robert Gilvesi himself. Till then, you can leave your comments under the episode's post on Instagram or send a direct message if you have more personal thoughts to share. Thanks for listening and don't take Dry January too seriously.